Matt Scratch here, and today I want to talk to you about flood vehicles in light of the recent flooding in Texas and also in Ontario, Canada. And sorry if you're in one of these affected areas, that's really rough, and hope you get through that. Hope you had insurance. Um, so this video would be more for those who don't have insurance. If you do have insurance on your car, I highly recommend you take advantage of that, because really I'm just going to go over with you all the things it would take to rehabilitate that vehicle properly and prevent future problems. And I think you'll agree at the end that it's just not worth it in most cases, unless you've got a really special car to try and save your car if it's been totally submerged. If it's only been partially submerged, well, then you might have a shot, but you know, if it's flooded up above the dash level and got everything wet, well, you're going to have a lot of issues there. You're going to have to deal with all the electronics in the dash, and things like the airbag system. You know, that's got like a cloth bag in there, and it's not going to be safe. It's not going to work properly after it's been wet, so it all needs to be replaced. And as well, things like the seats and stuff, they'd be nearly impossible to salvage. And all the carpet and everything, you know, if you leave that all in there, you're going to have a terrible mess, and it's going to mold in there and stuff. Really, you need to gut the interior, and if it's been sitting for a long time already, like a lot of times if you've been evacuated from your flood zone and, you know, the car's been sitting there 4 weeks or something, all closed up and wet inside, you know, there's already going to be a lot of damage done. Now, just to be clear, this actual car hasn't been flooded. I don't live in a flood area, so me finding a flood vehicle to do this video with would be pretty difficult, but I do know what would be damaged in a flood vehicle, so I just kind of want to go over, you know, what it would take to fix that if you so choose, and what would be damaged. So like I say, all the electronics, and even if something works after the flood, if it's had water in it and it's like a computer, you know, it's going to fail on you. It's just going to be a matter of time before corrosion builds up inside there and short circuits it, and the whole works burns out. And that's the big problem with flood vehicles showing up on used car lots and people buying them unaware, is they may work fine directly after the flood, you know, for a few months, and then corrosion starts to build up in those electrical components, and before you know it, things are just dropping left, right, and center, and it turns into a terrible money pit for you. Also, there's a lot of areas in your car that, like this door pillar here, and you know, even inside the door and stuff, it's going to fill up with sand and silt and dirty water, and it's going to rot everything out. Even in the undercarriage, there's all sorts of pockets in the undercarriage, you know, underneath, that's gonna fill up with you know, sand and grit. And if you don't get under there and pressure wash all that out after you recover it from the flood, it's gonna cause you issues down the road. You're gonna have, you know, abnormal rust in your undercarriage. You've also got things like fuel lines, brake lines, and electrical components that run through your undercarriage that have all been submerged in water, and you really want to get all that cleaned off as soon as possible after the flood happens. I mean, all your interior panels, they all have like a sound deadening material behind them that's all basically going to be contaminated and have to be thrown away. Even in here, like all these panels, and it's a lot of work to get these off. You have to remove the whole interior. These are pretty well the first piece that goes on, and you know, you've also got things like your stereo speakers aren't going to work properly after the flood, and you know, things like all your lights on the vehicle are most likely going to fill up with water if it's been submerged for any amount of time. And even things like the seals on these gas shocks are going to probably degrade over time if it was sitting underwater. I mean, things like that may seem minor, but when you compile them for the whole vehicle, they really add up. You know, even things like this little interior light here, you're going to have to basically pop the lens out and wash things like that out. Everything will have to get washed. Your fuel system will have to be completely emptied out. I mean, if it was submerged above the tank level, and there's going to be vents even lower than that, you're going to have you know, water contamination in your fuel system. So you'd basically have to remove the fuel tank and flush it all clean, and you know, flush out all the lines and stuff. You've got power mirror motors here that could fail on you, you know, afterwards. Things like your drum brakes, for sure, all the silt and grit and stuff in there, they're gonna fail after a while. From that, your shock absorbers, even things like that, you may not have considered, but they're all going to be, their life expectancy at least is going to be short. If you've got drum brakes, for sure the flood waters inside and all that sand and grit would cause rusting in there. It could cause the springs and retainer clips to degrade and even break, but also it would cause things to jam up and not slide freely. The automatic self-adjuster in there would fail to adjust, and your brakes would slacken off, so you'd need to do a brake service for sure after a flood. And even your disc style brakes, you'd want to remove the caliper pins and just clean them and re-grease them, because if they've got water in them, you could potentially get a stuck caliper later on. So this particular vehicle is front wheel drive, but if it was a rear wheel drive vehicle, the differential would also have to be flushed out. There would be a vent normally up under the undercarriage, like on a pickup truck or whatever. There's a vent tube going to the underside of the box, and if it's flooded above that vent, for sure you're going to have water intrusion into your differential, and it will, if you run it like that, it will mix in with the gear oil and greatly degrade your bearing life, and other components will rust and basically ruin your differential. Things like your sunroof and all that kind of stuff, your headliner and all the other components, airbags if you have them in your pillars and your roof, like side curtain airbags, you have to consider all that stuff as contaminated and damaged. It's going to mold, it's going to be stained, you're going to have electrical problems with the electrical components, and also it should all be removed, and all those beams and pillars and stuff that are, you know, double walled and stuff should be flushed out with clear water and air dried properly, force dried probably with fans. Basically, as soon as you can get stuff dried up, the better, the sooner the better, because, you know, the longer water sits in all those seams and stuff, rust is going to start to form, and once it takes hold, it's going to just be an accelerated process of rusting all over. And a lot of times that's what happens with those vehicles that have popped up on car lots, is that they weren't cleaned at all and they rust really quickly, and that's how the owners end up noticing. You've got computers under here that are going to be damaged. You've got your air filter that's for sure going to be waterlogged, assuming the water's come this high. Then there's also other things to consider on the engine, like the fact that the timing component system in here has a couple of bearings on it that could be waterlogged, and they could shortly start to squeal and burn out. So if you're trying to get your flooded out engine running again, it's really going to depend how deep it was under and how long it was under, how successful you're going to be. Of course, if it's been underwater for weeks and weeks, then it's possible that rust has formed in there. And in that case, I would probably drain everything out and flush it out with diesel fuel to try and flush as much of that water and everything out as possible. If it's had very minor water intrusion, then I would just go ahead and drain out the oil and everything and change the oil. I would definitely take the spark plugs out and run the engine over with the fresh oil in it, and blow that any water or anything out of the spark plug holes. You're probably gonna, if it's flooded over the engine, you're gonna have water in the spark plug tubes. So if you have an air gun that you can blow that out with, or a shop vacuum or whatever, try and get that all out before you loosen the spark plug, so it's not draining down into the cylinder, and then you run the engine over and it will spray out any remaining water out of the cylinder. And then it would be a good idea to also put some oil in each cylinder so that it's not dry on startup, and that'll kind of displace that water that's in there. And then of course after you've run it for a little bit, you'd want to change the oil again, because you're never going to get all that water out. So you're going to want to change the oil a few times and keep an eye on everything like that. Make sure that your oil's not milky after. If it is, just keep changing it until it stays clear. Even right here, you've got, like, under this cover, there's a wiper motor and a drive assembly for your wipers, and although it's somewhat water resistant, I'd say, it's not really waterproof. It's not made to be submerged underwater, and if it was for a few weeks, I wouldn't guarantee how long it would work thereafter. So things like that, you almost have to add them all up in your estimate to repair the vehicle and really see if it's justifiable. As I said, it would have to almost be a pretty special car or nearly new car to justify it, in my opinion. So if you're shopping for a used car and you suspect it's been flooded at all, I suggest you run. If you're looking for clues that it was flooded, I would check in areas like underneath the seats. You know, look up really good under the seats in the foam area there and everything, and look for rust, rust stains on the foam from the springs, or if some of them just have a metal plate under there. Look for that area isn't painted, and it shouldn't be terribly rusty. It might have some spots of rust on it, but it shouldn't be like a ball of rust. So if it is, I'd be suspicious. Look down in the bottom of the map pockets, and check in your speaker grill, and really look in there and try and get a look at the speaker, or at least if there's a lot of dirt built up in here, then you might want to be suspicious. And areas like around switches, and open up the glove box and check in there really good. Make sure, check behind it, kind of, get a look inside the dash, because as I understand, a lot of these flood vehicles don't get properly cleaned. They get put out on the car lot, and they're kind of surface cleaned. And of course, when you're looking at a used car, check that everything functions, because that'll be a real clue. If it's got a lot of electrical components like heated seats and power seats and stuff that aren't functioning, especially low-lying electronics, then I would really suspect that vehicle and run from it. Another area you can really check is you can pull out the seat belts and just pull them all the way out, like just keep pulling until they won't come anymore, and look at the condition of them, because maybe somebody's pulled them out a little bit and cleaned the exposed area, and if you pull it right to the end and really look, you might see some mud on it or something. Same thing with things like the headrest. If the headrests are in the down position, you could try pulling them all the way up. Check for mud in areas like that. If the back seats flip up or anything like that, you can look there. Always check all under the seats and everything like that, because areas like that are hard to clean. And actually things like this, you could just pull it up a little bit and kind of peek under the edge and see if it's muddy under the edge. So make sure you've got a flashlight with you. Shine down inside the vents on the car and everything, and make sure there's no grit or any mud or anything, water stained stuff of that nature down inside the vents. That would obviously be a direct clue that it's been flooded. Even things like this protective rubber sheath here that goes over the wire harness going into all four doors, that's would be full of water after a flood, and if you left it, it would almost certainly never dry out. And just having the wires submerged in the water all that time could be it could break them down and penetrate the coating on them and cause you problems down the road. Granted, it would be a while, but that's the problem with flood vehicles, is a lot of stuff, a lot of odd things crop up over time with them. So most modern cars, and I believe this one included, have a pre-tensioner system on the seat belt, and what that does is in an accident scenario, it tightens up the seat belt. It's basically like an airbag, and it snaps the seat belt tight to hold you back in the seat and basically prevent whiplash. And that's another system that would definitely be damaged in a flood and would likely need to be replaced. And of course, beware if there's a bunch of air fresheners all over the inside the vehicle. That might be to disguise a musty smell, or if the owner has it all the windows rolled down when you get there to test drive it or something, I'd be a little suspicious that maybe they had a musty smell inside that they were trying to disguise. If you end up in a scenario where you have to drive through deep water to get to safety or whatever, you're trapped in a flood zone or whatever like that, be aware that your car will have an air intake kind of headlight level on most cars, and you wanna be careful not to get water past that level, because you'll end up hydrolocking the engine. That's when your engine sucks in the water and it tries to compress it, and since the water won't compress, it will actually break the internal components of the engine, like the connecting rods and such. So you want to avoid having any sort of a bow wave. Don't go faster than you have to, you know, stuff like that. But of course, avoid driving through water if you can. Don't ever purposely drive your vehicle through deep water. It's one of the worst things you could do for it. So I think you're starting to understand why your insurance company would want to write off your vehicle. It's just too much of a liability for them, especially with all the safety items that get damaged in a flood. And it's just probably not going to ever be a reliable vehicle again unless all those electronic components get completely replaced. My recommendation would be to find a complete parts vehicle that's been in a collision or something, a vehicle that's not been flooded, that's exactly the same as yours, has the same interior options and everything, so that you can just go ahead and gut out your interior and wash everything out, flush everything out really good, dry it out, and then install the interior from the parts vehicle along with all the electronic components, and then you'll probably have a reliable vehicle again, and that might be an affordable way to accomplish that.